everyone. Well, I'm here on the spreadsheet that hopefully you all had time to place your data into. This is my attempt to try and give you an experience sort of like we would have in class where, I would have given you a piece of paper and you could have written all of this down on paper. And then during the break, I would have compiled it and shown it to you as a big ta-da after the break in class. So kind of like that, but much more cumbersome doing it online. But hopefully you got to have the experience. I did notice that in my spreadsheet, someone had deleted out the column that was supposed to be the place where you were supposed to write your name next to the participants that you were placing in here so I could keep track of who had done the task. I need to come up with a better strategy next time I teach this online if I'm going to repeat this exercise because there's no way for me to tell who did what. So that's not good. But what I've done is I took actually what I did is I downloaded the spreadsheet first thing, and then I sorted it by these two columns, whether the person was happy or not. So I've got a bunch of H's in this column, and then it goes to N for not happy. And then I've got a bunch of S for selfish and U's for unselfish. And I sorted it by those things so that then I could make this little matrix where I counted up how many people had the HS, and then how many people had the HU, and then how many people had the NS, and how many people had the NUs. And I put that all into this little matrix. This is replicating, like I said, what I would do in class where normally I would show, sorry, it didn't pop. Normally I would show this little matrix where we have the selfish and the unselfish on the rows, and we have happy and unhappy on the columns, and we compile the class's data, right? So that's what we're doing is, our little mock-up of this demonstration. All right, so I've made the little matrix. And then what I did was I realized, if we just look at it, we see, 77 unselfish people, and then you look yes, 77 unselfish happy people. And then you look to see that everybody else is, 28 or fewer, and you're like, well, gosh, there's a lot more happy, unselfish people. But you were kind of assigned to think of people who fit the different categories, right? So you're supposed to list people who you know well, and then this next one says, so you're supposed to have listed them. And then you were supposed to then characterize them. So hopefully you did it in that order. You didn't try and think of people who fit into the different categories, but you literally just thought of people and then looked to see what you're supposed to do next. And so maybe it's just, easier to think of happy people because we certainly have a lot more happy people on our list than we have unhappy people. We have a total of 105 people who you thought of who you characterized as happy, and then we have a total of 39 people who you thought of who you characterized as unhappy. So probably it's easier to think of happy people. It's possible that you're surrounded by happy people, right? Like maybe most of the people who you know are happy. So that might be why there's three times as many happy people as there are unhappy people in your sample. Maybe you thought of a lot of friends and relatives, and maybe you've seen them sometimes unhappy and sometimes happy, but because they're variable, you're thinking overall they mostly seem happy. Stuff like that. And so we have to take into consideration, though, that people thought of happy people more often than they thought of unhappy people. We also have to take into consideration that people thought of unselfish people much more often than they thought of selfish people, right? There's roughly twice as many people that you thought of who you then labeled as unselfish as people who you thought of and then you labeled as selfish. So it seems like you're surrounded by more happy, unselfish people than you are surrounded by unhappy, selfish people. So that's good news. I like that news. I want you to be surrounded by happy, unselfish people. But we have to take into consideration these proportions, right? We can't just look at the raw number and say, well, most people are happy and unselfish. We have to say, well, among the happy people, what proportion are selfish and what proportion are unselfish? Among the unhappy people, what proportion are selfish, what proportion are unselfish? So that's what I did over here, was I took this little matrix and I computed these numbers. If you want to know how to compute numbers with Excel, there are little, they call them formulas that you can type in where you can kind of see it up here. This doesn't get bigger, so there's nothing I can do to make that more visible for you. But you take the cells and the cell numbers and tell the system what to do. So on this one, I told it H3, so that would be, it's weird that it's not highlighting it honestly, H3 divided by I3. So that's going to take the proportion of happy people, so I'm on the row for happiness, who you characterize as unselfish, and divide that by the total number of happy people. That way I'm getting the proportion of happy people who you characterize as unselfish, and that turned out to be 73%. I did the same thing on the unhappy, unselfish row. So I came down here to unhappy and saw that there were 18 unhappy people who were labeled as unselfish, and then I divided it by the total number of unhappy people, and that gave us 46. And so what we're seeing is that proportionately, happy people are much more likely to be characterized as unselfish than unhappy people are. And then I did the same process for the selfish characterizations, right? So I went over to this column and I divided the number of happy people who were described as selfish by the total number of happy people, and the same thing for the unhappy, selfish people. And what we see here is a doubling of the number of people who are characterized as selfish if they had also been characterized as unhappy. And so it's possible that you just know more happy, unselfish people. That's completely possible. It's possible that you look at the people that you know through a little bit of, rose-colored glasses, where you see them through the in the best light, right? And so you're seeing them as happy and unselfish because you know them. And so maybe a little bit of what we call the halo effect, where you assume good things about them because you know them and you've seen good things in the past, and so you assume good things going forward. Um, and it's possible that it's, people who you know well who are mostly being characterized as happy and unselfish, and maybe people that you don't know very well being characterized as unhappy and selfish. Maybe it's, a teacher that you had for a year, or, something, a friend that you aren't friends with anymore, or something like that. So maybe you don't have as wide of a picture of their behavior across lots of situations and stuff. But having said all those things, because I have to be a good scientist and acknowledge that there might be other interpretations, in this field, the number one interpretation is that we tend to perceive happy people as less selfish because happy people are less selfish. It's hard to be happy while also being selfish, is sort of the interpretation of this field. And I mean, our raw data seems to be supporting, our class data seems to be supporting that interpretation, but it also could be, through the lens of who you thought of and how you feel about them in general and stuff like that. So right here is what I would characterize as our class data. And in your discussion, thinking of the people who you did enter or who you would have entered if you had entered data into this assignment, because some people didn't get it done. There we go. That's letting me go bigger. What I would like you to do in the discussion is think of your own data or the data you would have put in compared to this pattern, and talk in the discussion about whether your own personal data supports or refutes the claim that happy people are more likely to be unselfish and that unhappy people are more likely to be selfish. So think about that in terms of who you were thinking of. And then maybe you might even want to expand out and say, you know what, I didn't include some people who maybe would have been really useful data. I didn't realize where this was going, and now that I know, I would really like to throw out a case study that refutes this pattern or that maybe really exemplifies this pattern. Right? So think about those things as you're participating in the discussion. Talk to each other. Don't think of it as you need to post something and make two comments. Think about it like this is a discussion where the entire class is going to try and come to some kind of conclusion about whether it's true that happy people are less selfish and unhappy people are more selfish. Okay, that we're going to try and come to a conclusion about what we think is really true given the data of our class, our own personal 10 cases that we brought, additional cases that maybe we didn't think to enter, and so on, right? So using your best, I want to say logic. In psychology, we try not to rely on logic as our primary source of data, but using your logic in the context of the data that we have. That's what I would like to see happen in our discussion. All right, so have fun with that. Hopefully you enjoyed this process, even though I know it was a little confusing because there's so many steps involved, but I'll see how it worked out and see whether any other classes get to have this experience or have to have this experience depending on how you guys felt about it. All right, talk to you later.